So, I'm glad that you guys are here. Here's what we're talking about all month long. We're talking about exact change. It's a new sermon series that we started, and it's all about money. It's all about finance. And I know some of you are thinking, really? I haven't been to church in a year. I haven't been to church in 2 months. Steve hasn't preached about finance for 2 years, and all of a sudden we're talking about finance? Oh, this was one heck of a Sunday to decide to come to church today, all right? I get it. I completely understand it. Here's what I want you to know, though. I want you to know that Jesus, he probably told close to 30 parables in his ministry, depending on how you slice it. And of those 30 parables that he spoke about, 16 of them were about finance. In fact, he spoke more about money than he did heaven and hell. Okay, so if Jesus can talk about finance, I think we're safe to be able to talk about finance too. And I know that some of you, you're probably thinking, oh, the church must be in dire straits. Actually, not really. So I'm gonna just kind of continue to share with you just some other quick things about Jesus. But all month long, we're going to talk about Jesus' ministry and how he would teach about finance and some of the lessons that he shared about finance. But the only time that I can see in Scripture, and I might be wrong, so if you guys see this, I want you to come back to me and we'll compare notes. I think Jesus only asked for money one time in Jesus' ministry. And the only time that Jesus asked for money was when he asked if somebody had a coin. Because they were asking Jesus, hey, do we have to pay taxes if we're believers? If we're following after this new kingdom thing that you're talking about, do we have to actually give our money over to Rome or to Caesar? And Jesus asked to see a coin. Remember that? It was like a disappearing coin trick. Now, we don't know if Jesus kept the coin. I'm guessing he didn't. All right? That would just be mean. I think it would just be one of those things. Hey, let me see your coin. Let me see what it says, what it shows. And when Jesus saw the coin, he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? It has his image on it, so just give it back. And everything that we know, or what we assume that we know, is that he gave that coin back. Later, right after that story, he tells Peter to go fishing, and Peter catches a fish, and he told him before he caught the fish, it would have 2 coins in its mouth. Then go take care of our temple tax. That's the only time that we know that Jesus asked for money. So you guys can kind of relax, you guys can chill if you are approaching this series with any sort of nervous anxiety, because we're not after your money. Okay? The church doesn't need your money. Jesus doesn't need your money. In fact, we don't even need your money. We don't want your money. We want something far greater than that. All right? And so we're going to talk through some of those things. We're going to talk through some of what Jesus talked about. One thing I want you to know is I've said it a couple of times already in the intro, but the church is in a far better position than we've been in a long time. We are close to 516,000, Joe can help me with that, in the red, but we have much more in the black than we do in the red. And we've finally been in a position where our cash flow position is better than it's ever been. I want to just thank you for your generosity and for your giving. That doesn't mean that we're in a spot where we're going to reject all your gifts and we don't have to tithe anymore. All right? So what I'd like you to do is reach in front of you and grab the wallet or purse of the person right next to you, and just as we do our tithing today, just slip an extra 20 in. All right? Actually, what I want to share with you is that in the last 3 or 4 years, what we've tried to do is we've tried to be wise stewards financially of what we've been given. We have tried to exercise principles and processes and policies and even some personnel switches just due to life changes. But all of those situations have positioned us financially as a church to where we're in a better spot than we have been in the last 4 or 5 years, even the last 10 years. And we hope to continue to grow. But the reality is that we can't do what we do on a Monday through Saturday or a Monday through Sunday sort of feel without tithes, without offerings, without gifts. And we will continue to be wise stewards of the resources that you guys give us. We'll always look at what's coming into the house and then how do we need to adjust according to our programs and our processes based on what our anticipated revenues are. But as we look at where we're at right now financially, against where we projected that we would be, we're within a few $1,000s is all. And we had 3 hard Sundays this last spring. Do you remember when the snow was so bad and the weather was so bad and we had some real light Sundays? We'll never close church as long as I'm the pastor right next door, because it doesn't make sense for me to shut down the shop because I can walk over, all right? And if you brave souls want to come and, worship with us and break bread with us, we'll always have some form of worship and church and message every Sunday. But through those Sundays, it makes it kind of difficult sometimes because you get into lean situations. I want you to know I am not teaching on finance because of those 3 weeks. I'm not teaching on finance because we're in trouble. I'm teaching on finance because Jesus taught about finance. I'm teaching on finance because I want all of us to be extremely healthy financially. Because when you see somebody's life financially in a healthy spot, typically what you see is somebody who's in a spot healthy, in a healthy spot with Jesus. It just kind of follows suit. It's because they realize that as they interface with finances, they're not owners of what they've been given, they're actually stewards of what they've been given. And there's 3 different types of filters that I've seen as we talk about finance with people. The first one is some people do filter their finances through ownership. I realize that the large majority of everyone I'm talking to today, whether you're here in the audience or online, most of you think that the checks that you get in from your income, you believe is your own money. You approach it from ownership, from an ownership position. That this is all of yours, this is mine, and this is my little kingdom, and I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to make sure that myself is taken care of. Some of you filter your finances through ownership. Some of you filter your finances through stewardship. You believe that everything that you've been given isn't actually yours to hoard. It's not yours to protect and to guard and to develop. You know what it is? It's a gift from God, and He expects you to use it to the best of His kingdom, not your own. And so you are a steward of everything that you have. And everything that you have, you're giving back to God. And that's sometimes represented in the gifts, offering, and tithes. Others of you filter this conversation through entitlement. And this is going to be maybe a harder conversation for you all month long. Because it's not about stewardship. It's not about ownership. It's about give me, give me, give me, give me. I deserve, I deserve, I deserve. And your hands are out. And so I have a very mixed group of people all the time that we talk when we talk through finance. And some of that's represented through cross-generation and cross-culture. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just try to identify which lens are you approaching this conversation in as we start this conversation this week. Because all month long, we're going to be talking about it. And here's the other thing. Some of you, as you interact with finances, this isn't how you filter. This is the result of your financial conversations or your financial involvements. You see finances as this huge burden. It's overwhelming. You're always living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck to paycheck, and you don't know how you're going to survive. In fact, when you go and you put gas in the vehicle, you don't know how you're going to make it through the end of the week. And when it comes down to giving $25 to God or $25 to gas, it's an easy decision for you because you've already made the decision. You're giving money to gas. That's just how it works. And so when we talk finances, already there's kind of this, I don't want to talk about this because this is a burden for me. Some of you see finances as a complete blessing. And maybe that's because you've been wise. Maybe that's because you've been gifted. Maybe because you just have provision from inheritance. And so finances, you don't even think about. You don't even talk about. It's just kind of of course, finances are easy for me. So you look at it from a blessing standpoint. Some of you, your heads are in the sand. And you have no idea where you're at with finances. You don't even want to talk about finances. Finances are the last thing you want to talk about. It's right up there with politics and religion for you. And so I understand that this topic creates some anxiety. I get it. But realistically, I want you to, as your pastor, I want you to be healthy. As your pastor, I want what's best for you. I don't want your money. I'm not after your wallet. I'm not after your Porsche. I'm not after your dreams. I'm after your heart. I want something for you, not something from you. And neither does this church. So I think that's important to know right up front. So here, let me share this with you. Finances have not always been easy for me. In fact, they still aren't easy for me. But I love finances. Part of the reason I love finances is because I'm a geek. I love numbers. You can ask anyone that's had financial conversations with me. When I get the reports that are generated on my office once a month or once a quarter, I'm doing percentage calculations. I am. I'm looking at where each line is and where are we at against the schedule and where are we at against our projections. Are we higher in our spending or lower than our spending? How is each ministry doing? How is their awareness doing? I have lots of conversations with financial people. In fact, when Chris was our treasurer way back, she said, "You're the first pastor that I've ever met that's kind of a geek when it comes to numbers." Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. That was actually a compliment to me. Am I right, Chris? And that probably drove her absolutely nuts. I drive Joe nuts now because he's our treasurer, right? So we have conversations weekly. But and part of why I like numbers is because I think it's an indication of where we are in our faith. See, whether you're hot or whether you're cold, whether you're paycheck to paycheck, month to month, or whether you're in a spot where you can be a blessing to people, you know what finances represent? It represents where you're at in your faith. It's a condition of the heart. That's where it's at. And so, here's my personal experience with finance. I used to be a hoarder. No, I'm sorry, that's not right. That's my wife. Just kidding. She loves me. She was the saver, and I was the spender in our relationship. I was that guy that anytime I would get $75 from my weekly paycheck working for my dad or my grandpa, I would go and blow $72 out of that paycheck every week on just stupid stuff. On bowling, on movies, on food, on pizza, on Mountain Dew, whatever it was that I decided to buy, that money was mine, and I was going to use that money for whatever I wanted it to be. So I married a woman who is very frugal. She had more savings in her accounts than I had ever seen in my entire life combined, and I thought she was like rich, filthy rich. I found out later she wasn't filthy rich, she was just very wise with her finances. And so through a relationship with Mandy, we started to understand, like, okay, you have a strength here with savings that I don't quite understand, and I represent a strength with spending that she doesn't quite understand, right? So it's okay sometimes to buy a cup of coffee if you're at the gas station. It's okay to treat yourself every now and then. You don't have to hold tight. It's kind of like trying to get copper wire from Mandy was like taking a penny, all right? That's what happened. The wire just started coming out of that penny. It was so weird. But she's still like that. She's very frugal. She loves savings and deals. And she's always online to get the best deal possible. So the other thing about our finances, ashamedly, I wasn't a tither. I wasn't somebody that gave to our local congregation. You know what I would give to? I would give to organizations. I would give to missionaries. And since the 1950s, there's this weird anomaly that's happened to the church because since that decade, we have more parachurch organizations than we've ever had today. You, as a believer, as a follower of Christ, have more options to be able to give your finances in a generous way to whether it's a team expansion or a missionary that you know personally or even your local church. And so, that whole paradigm of giving, for me to give to the church wasn't necessarily me giving to God. It wasn't something that I registered with. Because I was giving my money away. I was giving, some of my 10% away, but I wasn't doing that on a regular routine. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that this idea clicked for me. Because we were struggling. We were struggling paycheck to paycheck. Now, Mandy had been a tither, and I was not. And we kind of had this honest coming to Jesus sort of moment in our marriage. And it was, why are we not giving? Why are we not regularly giving to our local congregation? And I think some of that was the two churches that we had previously served, one in Illinois and one in Minnesota. Here was their financial meeting. Their financial meeting was, hey, everybody, here's where we're at financially. And we were in the black all the time. I mean, we were giving, down in Illinois, we were giving close to $260,000 a year away to missionaries. I think we had close to 30 missionaries that we were supporting on a regular basis. My youth budget that I was in charge of, get this, $57,000. That's what my budget was down there. The church, their philosophy down there was we didn't want the kids to pay for anything. So any CIY, NYR, Superstart, it was all covered. In fact, not only were those events covered, college was covered. We encouraged kids to go to Bible college because we wanted to be a church that was producing ministers. And while I was with Illinois, we had sent, I think it was 9 students to Bible college. And we were paying close to $3,000, $4,000 a year for each student. It was insane, the sort of blessings that we were financially to the kingdom. In fact, Christian Standard and The Lookout, they had written articles on Fairfield Christian Church, First Christian Church of Fairfield, because they had this thing called Faith Promise that was a phenomenal thought, that people would pledge how much money they were going to give to missionaries every year. It was Faith Promise Sunday. Every October 1st, they would come down and based on the pledges that people would give to missions, that's what would happen with our mission department. They would take those numbers and they would say, okay, based on the pledges that people have brought in, we're going to be able to give $250,000 outside of our normal budget. It was an amazing concept. Then when we went to Minnesota, again, financially, they were very blessed. They never were in debt. They never had any red issues. They never had any bondage issues from financial debt. In fact, they were very generous too. They built us an auditorium right before we left. And they did a kitchen remodel and a narthex remodel, and they raised close to $200,000 in one weekend. It was just like this. It was just because they set it out to the congregation. So Mandy and I never really interacted with a church that struggled financially. Again, Rising Sun's not in financial dire straits. We're not. I know other churches that are in far worse position than we are financially, but we are not in the position that you see Fairfield or Kimball or any other churches that might have black. And so as we've interacted with tithing, I never really had a lot of teaching on it. And so as Mandy and I kind of got real with our finances and we started to get real with our faith, about 10 years ago, we were convicted that we needed to be giving consistently. This wasn't just a give to the missionaries when I find out that there's a need. This isn't trying to just go buy a bus or put some brakes on a vehicle for some missionaries. This is about continuous behavior. This is about dependency on finance versus dependency on God. And so, over the last, I think it's been 6-7 years, we have been giving regularly. We have intersected with our finances, or we've interfaced with our finances in 3 different methods. We see a tithe, a consistent giving, 10% right at the top. And then we have offerings, and then we have gifts. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. Biblically, in the New Testament, there's no such thing as tithing. You don't see that example anywhere in the New Testament. You see it in the Old Testament. And so for Mandy and I, what we personally do is we give just 10% off of our top right away. That's what we do. And how I do that is through bill pay. I set it up on my computer, on my laptop, and I authorize my bank to send a certain percentage of my check to this church every Monday morning that I get paid. And so as it sends, it comes in the office. We drop it in that little black slot that's right behind that's right behind where you guys are sitting. And then with the special gifts that we sometimes raise, or the special offerings that we sometimes raise, that's above and beyond that 10%. And so that's been our financial, that's where we've been. I'm just telling you that openly and honestly, not as like a braggadocious sort of way, but as an example sort of way. And what I've seen is that God has been faithful to us financially. In this last year, it's been remarkable to me, actually the last 2 years, how much financially we've been hit. We have, in this last year, financially, we've watched more money leave our checking account than we've ever seen. Because of medical expenses, because of vehicle expenses, because of taxes, because of whatever else. I have more money that has left my account, and yet I've given more in the last, every 2 or 3 years, I've been able to increase my giving to different organizations, different missionaries, and different churches. And I see that that's God's faithfulness. We're going to continue to be faithful to Him and watch Him continue to be faithful to us. The finances don't make sense sometimes. But here's the goal of the series. The goal of the series is not to guilt you into something. It's not to help give you financial tips that will help you ensure your financial freedom. I think those things will happen. I think that especially through financial tips, if you look on your bulletin or on your newsletter, you'll see down by the sermon notes that I've given you some of the best apps that I've seen when it comes to finance. As far as money management, some of the best apps there are Mint and Trim. You can download those. Those are free. You can look online. They're really easy to interface with. If you're in severe debt, some of the best apps that I've seen on debt is You Need a Budget. It's fantastic because it helps you find ways to trim some of where you're spending your money, and then it helps you apply that savings to your debt. As far as savings and investments, one that I haven't really tapped into yet, but I can't wait because I've seen all the reviews and I'm excited to do it, is Acorns. Acorns looks amazing to me as far as an investment app and Fundrise. Those are some of the best saving and investments. But one of the things that I got this from Dave Ramsey's website. I thought this was so cool. Tycoon is one of the best apps for you freelancers out there. You people that don't have a steady income. Maybe you're a photographer. Maybe you're a construction worker, and you don't have regular, routine, scheduled pay stubs or paychecks that's brought into you. So what it does is it helps you schedule out how much money you made and how to schedule that for all of your debt or all of your bills. So Tycoon is a fantastic resource. But the goal of this series is not to help you financially to get ahead. We will give you resources along the way. Now, one of the other things that we're real excited about, and if you look at your bulletin, it has all of the listed FPU classes. FPU means financial, what? Peace. What else? University, Financial Peace University, Dave Ramsey's program. We're offering 3 of those classes this month. The first one starts next June, and it's led by Josh DeBryan upstairs, Sunday school. I'm sorry, it's during the Sunday school hour. Then we're having another FPU class start next Wednesday, and then another one start the week after. Check your bulletin for those details. We want to help you get ahead financially, but again, that's not the goal of this financial series. It's not even to have fun, and we will have fun through the series. You know me. I preach, and I love to bring different elements in that kind of bring an entertaining factor in. We will have fun as we go through this series, but it's not to have fun. If you haven't seen the clothesline, what that's for is if you've gone through FPU, Financial Peace University, and if you'll take out $1, we're trying to gauge the saturation level of Rising Sun. How many people in our church have gone through Financial Peace University so that we can know, is this still effective? Is this still something we want to do? Then that's the clothesline money thing outside. We also have some coins as you walk in. All of the money that's going to be raised through this, through the coins and through the clothesline, it's all going to go help the Holy Smoke Benevolence. And if you want to know more details, go ask Mike. It's an amazing ministry, what's happening there. But we will have fun as we do this series. Again, the point of this series is not to bring more money to the church. That will happen, but that's not the point of this series. We expect our givings to go up this month because we're talking about finances. Some of you are going to learn principles that you've never thought of. You're going to be challenged by things that you've never considered. And more money will naturally come into the church because of that, but that's not the goal of this series. We're also not trying to persuade you to be more generous. We believe that will naturally happen, but that's not the goal. Here's the goal. Ready? Here's my agenda. My agenda to talk about finance is to point you to Jesus. Because Jesus knows what has a hold of your heart. Jesus knows the things that hold on to us. And when we really encounter Christ, what's going to happen is we're going to understand that he changes everything. So I'm going to ask you to turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to see a story of a guy who encountered Jesus. And we're going to move through some of this rather quickly. So let me give you a little context. Let me set the stage. In Matthew chapter 9, we're about 6 months into Jesus' ministry, okay? So Jesus has already been baptized. He has already initially had some conversations with Andrew and with Peter and with Nathaniel and James and John, and that was down south by Jerusalem after he had been baptized. After he had originally said, hey, follow me or come and see, Jesus goes off and is tempted for 40 days. And as he's tempted in the wilderness for 40 days, he has his kind of identity stuff happening to him. Satan is attacking who he is, and he's attacking the very mission that Jesus came with. And after that 40 days, and he defeats Satan in that temptation, he goes back up north, and he sees a couple of fishermen along the shore. And you guys have heard this story before, right? They're done fishing for the night. They're cleaning their nets for the next go-around the next day. He's already had a conversation with Peter and Andrew. He's already had a conversation with James and John, but he hasn't actually officially called them into ministry yet. He's just said, hey, why don't you guys come and check things out? We're going to start this. We're going to revolutionize the kingdom. I mean, things are going to be different. And so as he goes back up north to the Sea of Galilee, and he's walking along, and he sees these fishermen cleaning their nets, he says to James and John, hey, I know you guys are done, but can you guys cast your nets on the other side of the lake, or other side of the boat? Can you put it into the shallows? What? That doesn't make any sense. Peter accommodates it because, well, it's Jesus, and why would you not, even though he was a carpenter? And as they start to pull in the nets, you guys know the story, they have a huge catch. A catch that Peter has never seen in his entire life. In fact, this catch would set Peter and Andrew up to be in a financial position where they would never have to work again. They would be the fishing suppliers of the area. And so after seeing this, it says that Peter and Andrew and James and John, you know what they did? They left everything and they followed Jesus. Now, Jesus, he's had some teaching along the way, too. And in fact, he went back to his hometown. Some miracles were happening. They tried to push him off of a cliff, and Jesus, just walked right by everybody. Another crazy thing about what's happened in Jesus' ministry so far is he's already done some teaching. He did some teaching about, it's found in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And then it says that he was walking along the way, and that's where we come into our text today, Matthew chapter 9. I'm in verse 9. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man. He saw a man. I want you to circle the word saw because we're going to deal with that here in a second. But we know that this man is going to be named Matthew. That's what Matthew writes about himself. He saw a man by the name of Matthew. We don't know much about Matthew. We don't know hardly anything actually about Matthew. We know that Matthew shows up a couple of times through the different Gospels, let me just call time out. Each one of the Gospels that we're reading, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each one of them have a different theme or a different reason for why they're writing. Matthew tells us that Jesus is the King of the Jews, the one that was promised all those years ago. He is the promised Redeemer. He's the promised Savior. Hey, Jews, we've been waiting for this guy. He's it. And so Matthew's primary audience is the Jewish audience. Mark, he writes for a completely different reason. He's trying to tell us that Jesus, while Matthew says, yeah, he's the promised King of the Jews, Mark writes to the Greek audience and he says, listen, he's a servant. Above all else, he's a servant. And Luke says, not only is he the King of the Jews, not only is he a servant, but Luke says he is the Son of Man. He is one of us. We can identify with where he's at, and he can identify with us. John says that he is God. So each one of them have a different theme that they're writing about, but Matthew specifically has a very Jewish narrative. It points back to the Old Testament scriptures more than anything else. And so Matthew, the only time that we see the word Matthew show up is twice in his own letter, once in Mark when Mark writes about who the disciples were, and Luke writes about him twice, once in his gospel and then once in Acts, for the same reason. Here are the disciples of Jesus, Matthew. He's just found in the lists. We don't know much about Matthew. There's no recorded dialogues with him and Jesus. There's no major event with Matthew and Jesus. It's just Matthew shows up as one of the 12. The name that he goes by, in fact, is his professional name, not even his personal name. The other thing that we know from this text, it says it in Matthew 9:9, as Jesus went on from there, he saw, he gazed intently, he looked. It's that one weird kind of stinky eye that sometimes people give you. They know something's up and you know something's up, but you don't really say anything. That's the saw that we're talking about here in Matthew chapter 9. Jesus is walking along the way and he kind of takes eyes at Matthew. And they lock this gaze. And he comes across this man by the name of Matthew, and he's a tax collector, Matthew says. Now, here's what we know about tax collectors. Tax collectors were outcasts in the Jewish society because they were the ones who betrayed the Jews. The Roman government had set up this thing where that they wanted people to tax people and collect the taxes from people, but they would offer it out to the highest bidder. So if you were a Jewish person, you would set out an offer to the Roman government that you would say, I can guarantee that I can get this kind of money from my people. And not only will I make sure that you get your money, I will also get my money. And whatever you guaranteed, you had to give to the Roman government. But anything that you demanded of the other people, that was all just yours that you could line your pockets with. Tax collectors were despised and hated. Here's the cultural equivalent. Think of a child molester. Think if a child molester came into our audience today, or they were sitting right next to you. You would probably have this feeling. That's what a tax collector was for the Jewish person. They were so vile. I mean, they were separated from all other castes. They were completely separate. They were neither Jew, even though they were, and they were neither Rome. Right? So if you were Roman people, you hated the tax collectors because they betrayed their own people. They're prostitutes, basically. But if you were a Jewish person and you saw a tax collector, they were hurting you. They were stinging you. They had left your community. You hated them. You were on an island, no man's land. And so the Jews would not allow tax collectors into their temple. They weren't allowed into political conversations. They weren't allowed to vote, if there ever was one. These guys were outcast by every sense of the word. And more than that, they were probably bullies. They had a way of getting money back from you. You know how it was? They would torture you. They would hurt you. They would betray you. They would lie about you. Any method that they could use. I mean, it's kind of like the mob. If you didn't pay your taxes, they'd break your kneecaps. Matthew was tough. Matthew was hated. And the other weird thing about Matthew is he was so observant. Like, he knew everybody in their society. He knew everything about everyone. He knew who everyone was connected to. He was so detailed in his thought processes and so meticulous with his details. No one liked him, but everyone knew him. And all of that changed this day in Matthew 9:9. So as Jesus goes on from there, Jesus locks eyes with this dude by the name of Matthew. He's sitting at the tax collector's booth. And Jesus literally says, follow me. That's it. He doesn't try to convince him. He doesn't try to, talk to him about his past sins. He doesn't say, hey, I need you to change who you are. Just follow me, Matthew. Follow me, Matthew. And Matthew records what happened next. He got up and he followed him. Verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And on hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Let me just give you a couple of unique things in this account, okay? A couple of unique things. We're going to learn from Mark's account and from Luke's account some other details about Matthew that we didn't know. The first thing that we're going to learn in Mark's account is that he's actually the son of Alphaeus. And Alphaeus was also the father of another disciple by the name of James. So James and Matthew are actually brothers, not James and John. Another James and Matthew are brothers. And it's interesting that Matthew doesn't say that Jesus called Matthew the son of Alphaeus. Mark has to give us that detail. Another thing that we learned in Luke's account is that Matthew's actually the one that sponsors and flips this entire meal. Matthew doesn't say anything about who's paying for the meal. He doesn't say anything about what's happening and how they were able to get to this meal. We just know that he's a tax collector, and that's what Matthew wants us to know about himself. Because Matthew is very quick to associate his profession with the lowest class of people anytime he references himself. In fact, in Matthew chapter 9, verse 10, do you see what he says? Many tax collectors and sinners. That's who Matthew associates with. I am not worthy, is what Matthew's saying. I am just like other people who are sinners in Jesus' presence. Matthew records what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 46, the Sermon on the Mount. And this is what Jesus says. And here's how I picture it. I picture Matthew sitting in his booth doing his thing, and he's listening. He's watching this dude from Galilee. He's watching this guy from Nazareth teach, and he's got everybody's attention. And this is what he says in chapter 5, verse 46. He said, if you guys love people who love you, big deal. What's it matter? Even the tax collectors do that. And I think, I kind of wonder if Jesus, when he said even the tax collectors do that, if he didn't look over and gaze at Matthew. See, Matthew knows what Jesus thinks of him. Matthew knows that Jesus knows who he is. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 17, it's a chapter about discipline. It's about if a brother sins against you, go to that brother. And if he doesn't listen, bring some people back. Bring some people with you. And then if he doesn't listen to those people, here's how to treat that guy. This is what Jesus says, and Matthew records it. If this man refuses to listen to the witnesses, tell the church. And if he doesn't listen then, you should treat him like a pagan or a tax collector. So when Jesus writes, or when Jesus says that, Matthew in his diary's got to be going, oh man, that stings. I know what that's like to be treated like a tax collector. Why does Matthew tell us that detail and no one else does? The very last week of Jesus' life, Jesus tells this parable of two sons. And he says, a man had two sons, and he told both of them, hey, I want you to go out and work the field. One son said, nah, that doesn't sound like fun, Dad. I'm not going to go work the field. And then after that conversation, he got up and he worked the field. The other son said, sure, Dad, I'll do that for you. And that son who said he would do that thing, never did that thing. And Jesus leans in and he says, which son actually did the work of the Father? And you know what the teacher said? The teachers of the law said, well, the one who actually did the work. And Jesus said, that's right. Let me tell you the truth. Even the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going to enter the kingdom before you. See, what Jesus is doing is kind of turning this whole thing upside down, but Matthew's so quick to associate with the lowest because he was one of the lowest. They were a class to themselves. These were the people that Jesus searched for. These were the people that Jesus rescued. These are the people that Jesus loved hanging out with. Another unique thing about Matthew is that he's the only one that writes about this story and tells and references Hosea. Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. In fact, he references the Old Testament in his gospel 99 times. This is one of those 99. Every other gospel writer doesn't even come close to how many times they reference the Old Testament. Matthew is writing to the Jewish people because he is Jewish, even though he could never live up to their expectations. See, he was living with unmet expectations. The reason why is because he doesn't even share his name. That's the crazy thing about this rendition with Matthew. We have to learn from Mark and from Luke what his given name is. Not his professional name, what his given personal name is. You know what his given personal name is? Levi. You know what Levi tells us? Levi tells us that his mom and dad had high expectations for his son. The name Levi tells us that they might have been from the tribe of Levi. The name Levi tells us that his mom and dad probably thought he was going to be a priest or a worker in the kingdom. And Matthew's a tax collector? Matthew doesn't even go by the name Levi anymore. He's adopted his professional name. Even when he's writing to a Jewish audience in his letter, he doesn't even refer to probably the best Jewish name possible, Levi. It's because it's not turned out the way that he thought it would. And maybe you're like Matthew. Maybe you're looking at where you're at in life and you're wondering, how did I ever get here? This isn't what I ever thought it would be. Maybe you're looking at your finances and you're wondering, why am I in this spot that I'm in? Listen, if that's where you're at today, you're in the right spot. You're in the exact right spot. What we're going to look at for the next month is what money would tell us. Because what money says and what Jesus says are so closely associated with one another. It's scary close. If money could talk to us, what would it say? But before we do that, I think it's important for us to have this conversation about what would Matthew tell us? Because we can have financial conversations all day long, but if it's not filtered from the lens of Jesus, if it's not filtered from the lens of resurrection, then all that we're talking about is country club dues. All that we're talking about is financial principles. But in this kingdom, in this church, in this world, in this life that we've been given, if we're following Jesus, he changes all of that. And Matthew would lean in and he would tell you a couple of things that I think you would want to know in your own life story. So here, let me tell you the 4 things that I think Matthew would tell you. The first one is, let Jesus call you from your booth. Let him call you from your booth. You see, when Matthew was sitting in his booth, he wasn't trying to close up shop. He wasn't standing outside the booth when he saw Jesus coming. He didn't try to tidy up his life. He didn't try to make everything perfect before he met Jesus. Matthew just sits there. He catches gaze with Jesus, and Jesus starts walking, and he doesn't try to get his life in order. He lets Jesus call him from his spot that he's sitting, that spot that's kind of nasty, like he's got his hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. And I know some of you, you're trying so hard to fix your own life before you come next to God, before you encounter Jesus. Listen, if you fix your life, Jesus isn't needed. Jesus needs to call you right from your spot where you're sitting. Jesus needs to call you from that spot where you don't want to be called from. I know you don't want to be seen. I know that some of us, we put on masks all the time. We try to make ourselves look better than we are. We try to put our finances together. We try to put our relationships together. We try to put our marriages together. We try to put our home in order. We try to pretend like we're something that we're not. And Matthew's just sitting there. Matthew's just sitting there. And then when Jesus calls him, he doesn't say, and then he closed his books and he went and reported everything to Rome. No, he just followed him. He just abandoned his post. So one of the questions for me as I think about this principle that Matthew would maybe tell me is, what's keeping me from leaving my booth? What's keeping me from leaving where I'm sitting? Because if Jesus wants to call me from that spot where I don't want to be, then I need rescuing. And when he finally does call me, what's keeping me there? The second thing that I think he would tell us is, get up, just like he got up, and throw a party. I mean, this is a celebration that he would call you out of your booth, that he would call you out of your spot. Listen, you are not in a spot where he wants you to stay. He wants you to throw a party for people, those people that you associate, the sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, those other people. He wants you to throw a party for him. Now, this drives some of us nuts because those financial people, those financially type A-minded people, you know what they're thinking right now? Matthew, what are you doing? Why are you throwing a party? You just lost your job, man. What are you doing? You gotta live on your savings. You gotta cut your cost. You can't be spending stupidly. What are you thinking? And see, what I think's going on in Matthew's head is he, for so many years, for his entire life, you know what he's been living for? Himself. Everything financially has been about him. Now, this party, it's not about him. It's not about, hey guys, come check out how great things are in my... You know what he's doing? He's throwing a party so that all the people that he knows and he loves might see Jesus. His finances are completely rearranged. He's upside down. The things that he's doing don't make sense to us financially. And if you were to look at my books, and if you were to look at what I spend my money on, you guys would go, what are you doing? Why are you giving that much money to missionaries? Why are you giving that much money to tithe, to the church? What are they even doing for you? You guys would wonder why I tip so much. Some of you have. My mom, I love this conversation. This was so cool. Sometimes one of the things I like to do, if I'm feeling extra generous, is most of you have eaten with me, you know this. I'll get the waiter or waitress's name, and I'll ask them what I can pray for them about before I pray. This is as they're taking my order, I'm taking their order. And I'm saying to them, hey, Cassandra, Lucy, what can I pray for you about? And it really catches people off guard. And then I pray for them. And then at the end of the conversation, I'll say, hey, how can I bless you today? Or if they're watching me fill in the tip, I'll say, how much you want? And you know what's happened sometimes? They'll tell me. And that's more fun. Because if they tell me, like $100, I'll write $100 down. I'll give it to them. Now, I'm not saying you should do that all the time. You might go broke, right? But I've done that before. I have literally, and it happened in front of my mom like 3 years ago. She was watching this whole interaction, and this lady was serving me, and I said, how much am I putting down here? Oh, $100. And I wrote $100 and signed it. And my mom about fell out of her chair. I love being generous. I love being a blessing to other people. That's what you've been called to be, is a blessing to others financially. You can't do that if you haven't given him your finances. And that's the third thing that I think Matthew would tell us. Give him your ledger. Give him your ledger. Give him both the red and the black. Give him all of your debt and all of your assets. Give him everything that you've got. Give him everything that you've got. This isn't just giving him your future and holding back your finances. This isn't just giving him your pulse or your purse and not giving him your pulse. This is about giving him everything that you've got. One of the details that Luke tells us, and I love that Luke tells us this because he honors Matthew or Levi more than Matthew honors himself. Luke writes in Luke chapter 5, verse 28, in this story, he says, Matthew left everything. Now, that's different than just James and John leaving everything. You know why it's different? James and John could still go back home to their dad and fish. In fact, we find out they do after Jesus' crucifixion. You know what Matthew can't do? He can't go back to Rome and say, I'd like my old job back. I know I left the post, sorry. He can't do that. Once he's forfeited his post with Rome, he's done. And the other crazy thing is because he's neither Jewish nor Greek at this point, he can't go find a trade in the Jewish culture. He literally leaves everything. And what Matthew would tell you is, listen, give him everything you've got. You can't trust him with your future and not trust him with your finances. So, what are you holding back from him? That's kind of the question for me, is how is it that we can trust him with our future and not trust him with our finances? Fourth thing that I think Matthew would tell us is this. Jesus is the exact change that you're looking for. Some of you know that you can't stay where you're at. You know that you can't stay where you're at in a personal level, in a spiritual level, in a financial. He is exactly what you're looking for. It might not make sense. It might not make sense. But see, any other conversation that we were to have in this next month, that would be about finances, without Jesus, without the resurrection, all it is membership dues. All it is financial strategies. You guys can get that anywhere else. We're going to talk about finances in a different way because Jesus changes everything financially about us. I believe an encounter with Jesus and the power of his resurrection changes everything. So, what's changed in your life? What literally has changed in your life because you know Jesus? How are you different? How are your finances different? How is your life different? How are things arranged differently for you? Here's some things I want you to do. I want to give you some practical things to do this week. I'd like you to make a commitment to evaluating your finances. Pray through those finances. Pray through, I want you to literally find time this week and just go, God, I want to give you everything I've got. I want to give you everything I am. I don't want to hold things back. I want to hold my future. I don't want to hold on to my I want you to have everything. I want you to spend time praying about it. And then I want you to spend time evaluating, literally writing down who you're giving to and why. And maybe for some of you, it's what you're giving to and why. Write down the frequency of those gifts and of those generosities. And then at the end of it, evaluate, am I living for me or am I living for kingdom? So pray, evaluate, and assess, okay? And then pray some more. That's all I want you guys to do this week. This next month, we're going to walk through all of this, but this conversation has to be filtered through the lens of Christ and the resurrection, or none of what I'm about to say makes any sense. Father, thanks for who you are. Thanks for this day. Thanks for the fact that you've redeemed us and rescued us and asked me to give you everything I've got. Lord, I want to be more like Matthew in that pursuit. Lord, I pray that you would help us to continue to be wise stewards of everything that you've given us, not owners. And Lord, certainly don't let us be entitled. In Christ's name, amen.